So what we're going to do is discuss the juncture of last week's parsha and this week's parsha. So this will make up for last week as well. Now the structure of Sefer Vayikra overall is a little perplexing. The Sefer begins with the Kadosh Baruch Hu speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu in the Ohel Moed, because we know that once the Mishkan was built, that's where Kadosh Baruch Hu spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu from. So apparently, Sefer Vayikra begins after the Mishkan was built. The last two parshias, BeHar and B'chukosai, are identified in the pasuk as having been given at Har Sinai. So chronologically, the parshias of BeHar and B'chukosai really precede the beginning of Vayikra. We pointed this out in the past. Apparently, the rule of Ein Muktim U'Muchar B'Torah applies here. That the Torah is not in strict chronological order, but it's in thematic order. So for some reason the Torah took these parashias which were said before and placed them at the end. It's the natural follow-up to Parshas Emor. Parshas Emor, therefore, really, in a chronological sense, is the conclusion of Sefer Vayikra. And it ends with a story. It ends with the story of the Makalel. There was a Jew. He was, at least according to the Ramban's Pshat, a full-fledged Jew, but not a member of any particular Shevet, because his mother was Jewish, but his father was a Mitzri. So he's called in the pasuk Ben HaYisraelis. The Ramban understands that as meaning not that he wasn't Jewish, he was fully Jewish, because the mother's status confers Jewishness on the child, but he's not a member of a Shevet, so he's not called a Yisraeli. He's a Ben HaYisraelis. And he got into a fight with another Jew who was a Ish Yisraeli, and as a consequence of this fight, he cursed the Ribono Shel Olam, and there was a quandary what to do, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu that he should be executed because the punishment for blasphemy is skila. And this is the conclusion of Sefer Vayikra, at least in the chronological sense. Now this is noteworthy for two reasons. Number one, that in Sefer Vayikra we generally don't have stories. There really are only two stories in the entire Sefer. One is the story of the death of Nadav and Avihu, back in Parsha Shmini, and the second is the story of the Makalel. Well, the death of Nadav and Avihu, I understand. This took place on the day of the dedication of the Mishkan, so perhaps that relates to the subject of Korbanos. But why is the story of the Makalel here in Sefer Vayikra? It should be in Sefer Bamidbar, along with another very similar story, the story of the Makoshesh, the person who was Machalel Shabbos, and also they didn't know what to do, and they consulted the Ribono Shel Olam. The Ribono Shel Olam said that he should be executed. It's interesting, Rashi points out in this week's parsha that really the two stories took place at the same time. And the difference in the two stories is that in the case of the Makalel, they knew, in the case of the Makoshesh, they knew he was Chayav Misa, they just didn't know what Misa to give him. In the case of the Makalel, they didn't know B'chlal, he was Chayav Misa. But the two stories took place at the same time. So the question is that this story should be in Sefer Bamidbar. Sefer Bamidbar has stories. But in any case, it's hard to understand how this is the conclusion of Sefer Vayikra. You know, we would think that a Sefer builds to a climax. Sefer Bereshis builds to a climax with the passing of the last of the generation of the Avos, meaning Yosef. And Sefer Shemos leads to a climax with the resting of the Shekhinah and the Mishkan. We'd think Sefer Vayikra should come to a climax. This seems to be an anti-climax. That the conclusion of Sefer Vayikra is the execution of a blasphemer. How does that relate to the overall theme of Sefer Vayikra? Why is that the conclusion, at least in the chronological sense of the Sefer? Let's talk a little bit about our parsha, Parshas BeHar. Parshas BeHar begins with the mitzvahs of Shemitah and Yovel. Shemitah, they were not allowed to do avodas karka. We can't work the land in the seventh year. What is the rationale behind this mitzvah? So this is a matter of discussion, Mefarshim, Midrashim. I'll read you one Midrash, which says the following: Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ziru Sheish, V'hashmitu v'hishbisu shvius, plant for 6 years and release the land for the 7th year, K'dei shetedu she'ha'aretz sheli, in order that you should know that the land is mine, V'ani nisatia lochem ma'rosha, and I gave it to you as an inheritance. But the purpose of Shemitah is we should know it's God's land. In other words, we have Eretz Yisrael, we tend to think of it as ours, we can do what we want with it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, by telling us, no, this year you can't plant, he is informing us this is my land, and therefore it's subject to my rules. That's the idea of Shemitah. Now this is not mentioned anywhere explicitly in the Pasuk. There's no Pasuk which says that this is the idea behind Shemitah, and according to the other Mefarshim have different understandings. The Kli Yakar says the idea of Shemitah is to implant the Midas HaBitachon, trust that for a year we don't plant and we have to rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And others say, much more down-to-earth cheshbon, that the land needs to have its rest. So there are all sorts of cheshbonos. But the Medrash says this is the cheshbon. The cheshbon of Shemitah is that we should know that the land is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now the truth is that the Pasuk does say this about Yovel. When it comes to Yovel, a little bit down the road, the 50th year, there the Pasuk does say explicitly, that the land should not be sold for perpetuity. We know the halach of Yovel is that farmland that was sold reverts back to the original owner. Ki li haaretz, for the land is mine. And likewise, when it talks about the halacha that avodim are released when Yovel comes, the Pasuk says again twice. The Pasuk says that the rationale behind that is Ki avodayhem asher otzeisio some eretz Mitzrayim. The Jews are my servants, and therefore you can't enslave them beyond Yovel. The idea of Yovel is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is demonstrating his ownership. So this idea, which the Pasuk explicitly states regarding Yovel, this Medrash understands is also the theme which underlies Shemitah as well. But we have to understand that obviously this lesson is meant to be learned on 2 different levels. Because the Torah says that how do we establish Yovel? We go through 7 cycles of Shemitah. Sheva Shabso Shanim, Sheva Shanim, Sheva Pamim, 7 times 7. So we go through the Shemitah cycle 7 times, and then we come to Yovel. Which seems to mean that after we reinforce the lesson of Shemitah 7 times, then we can proceed to learn what has to be learned from Yovel. So if the 2 are really related to the same idea, it must be that Yovel takes this to a higher level. That only after 7 Shemitahs can we have the understanding that comes with Yovel. What's the idea? If Shemitah teaches us the land is God's, and Yovel teaches us the land is God's, what is the lesson of Yovel over the lesson of Shemitah? What do we learn from Yovel that we don't see in Shemitah? And the answer is very simple. If you look at the numbers, and this already was pointed out by the Abarbanel, Shemitah follows the pattern of the regular Jewish week. In the regular Jewish week, we work 6 days, and we have Shabbos on the 7th. So here, when it comes to Eretz Yisrael, we work the land for 6 years, and we rest on the 7th year. Yovel follows the pattern of Sfiras Ha'omer. Sfiras Ha'omer, we count 49 days, 7 times 7, in anticipation of Shavuos. The 50th day is the day of Matan Torah. So likewise, Yovel follows that pattern. 7 times 7 in terms of years, and the 50th is the Yovel. If you think about it for a moment, the lesson of Shabbos and the lesson of Matan Torah is different. There's a subtle difference between the 2. The lesson of Shabbos is that by virtue of the fact that God created the world was his, which is a very reasonable proposition. If you make something, it's yours. So God created the world, therefore the world was his. The corollary of that is, number 1, we have to be obedient. We have to do what he says. It's his world. Number 2, we have to have a karas hatayv. We have to be grateful to whatever he gives us, because it's really his, it's not ours. So that's the lesson of Shabbos. And that's the lesson of Shemitah. Very straightforward. Yovel takes it to a higher level. And as we said, Yovel corresponds to Matan Torah. In what sense? The chidush of Matan Torah is not just that the world is God's, but that there's a plan for the world. There is an objective, there is a purpose. Bereshis bara Elokim b'shvil Yisrael shnikru Reshis Yom HaShishi Tonight Hisna Kadosh Baruch Hu Ma'aser Reshis. He made a condition that the world will revert back to Tohu V'Vohu unless Klal Yisrael accepts the Torah on the 6th day of Sivan. In other words, Matan Torah is more than the mere fact that God created the world. Is that God created the world for a purpose, and I would say even more than that. The idea that Atzas Hashem Yisakum, that God's purpose will be realized no matter what. That's the very nature of Shavuos. Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Kaf Aleim Har Kegigis, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu held the mountain over our heads and said, if you're Makabel the Torah, fine. If not, Shem Tei Kfuraschem. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying is that this is the Tachlis Habriya, this is the purpose of creation. It will be realized no matter what, whether you like it or not. It must be. And if it requires duress, so be it. And as the Maral says, that even though Klal Yisrael already said Nasiv and Ishma previously, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu deliberately held the mountain over their heads to drive home this point, that you should know that Torah is not a take it or leave it proposition. It must be. My objective in creating the world must be realized, and therefore it will be so. When it comes to Shemitah, what do we not do during Shemitah? So we don't work. We let the land be fallow. Being fallow is not a fulfillment of God's objective. God didn't create the world that it should be fallow. God created the land that it should be cultivated. But this is his demonstration. How am I going to demonstrate that it's my world? I'm going to tell you, don't use the world for its intended purpose. It's my world, and therefore, although I created it to be cultivated, I'm telling you, don't cultivate it this year. That shows that it's my world. But that's not the fulfillment of the tachlis. That's not the fulfillment of the purpose. Yovel is beyond that. Because what happens in Yovel, in addition to the Israel like this karka, land reverts back to its owner, which means there's a divine scheme. A portion of the Eretz Yisrael, division of the Eretz Yisrael to the Jews, was al pi gairo. And as the pasuk says, right, b'chek yutal gairo me'Hashem kol mishpato, that the mishpat of a gairo comes from the Ribbon Shel. So the division of Eretz Yisrael is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's scheme. And we undermine that scheme. We chip away that scheme. We sell the land. We give the land. We reapportion the land. Comes Yovel, and everything reverts back in accordance with the divine scheme. That's a higher level than Shemitah. It's not just the assertion that the world is God's world, but it's the assertion that God's world has a plan, there's an objective, there's a purpose, and that purpose will be realized no matter what. That's the chiddush of Yovel over Shemitah. And therefore you can't have a Yovel until you go through 7 Shemitahs. After you learn the lesson of Shemitah well, you chavis it over 7 times 7, then you come to the lesson of Yovel, which is a much higher level. Not just that this is God's world, but that Atzas Hashem Yisakum, that God's plan will be realized no matter what. And the truth is, everything I'm saying is not my chiddush. This is exactly what the Sefer HaChinuch says. If you look at the Sefer HaChinuch's words and the respective mitzvahs of Shemitah and Yovel, you'll see this is exactly what he says. When it comes to the mitzvah of Shemitah, he says as follows. He says, Mesharshei HaMitzvah, the shorish of the mitzvah of Shemitah, this is mitzvah Pei Daled, Likvaya B'libeinu, to establish in our hearts, Uletzayer Tzir Chazak Machshavteinu, and to picture very, very firmly in our minds, Inyan Chidush HaOlam, the idea that God created the world. Kisheishes Yomim Asa Hashem Es Hashmayim Es Haaretz, Uvayom Hashvi Shloi Bara Davar, and on the 7th day where nothing was created, Hichtiv Menucha Al Atzmo, he wrote about himself that he rested. It doesn't say that he rested. We can't say, what does it mean God rested? So God wrote in the Chumash that he rested, whatever that means. And therefore, in order to uproot the false belief in the Olam being Kadmai, the world always having existed. So therefore, this year, the 7th year, the Torah says, don't work the land. So basically, what does the Sefer Chinuch say? That what is the lesson of Shemitah? The lesson of Shemitah is that God created the world. It's God's world. When it comes to Yovel, says the Sefer Chinuch, what is the lesson of Sefer Yovel? And this is in Mitzvah Shin Lamed. The Sefer Chinuch says, Mishar Shia Mitzvah al Tara Pshat. Shirotza Hashem L'Idea La'amo. He wanted to inform his nation, Ki Akol Shaloi. Everything is his. V'lib Seif, in the end, Yoshuv Kol Dover La'asher Chafetzu Litna Batchila. That in the end, it'll go back to the person he wanted to give it to in the first place. And not just that it's his world, but that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan will be realized in the end no matter what. That in the end, whatever you try to do to undermine, to chip away at the plan, but in the end, it's going to come back to where it's meant to come back. That's the lesson of Yovel. And it's really the Farish in the Chinuch. Everything I'm saying is really just written in the Sefer Chinuch. I want to point out that we pointed out in the past an interesting thing, that Shemitah, the Shemitah year begins on Rosh Hashanah. The Yovel year begins on Yom Kippur. Right? It says in the pasuk, they blow the shofar on Yom Kippur, and that begins Yovel. The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, which says that Echad B'Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah l'Shmitim u'Yovelas, the Gemara asks the Kasha, Yovel starts on Rosh Hashanah, Yovel starts on Yom Kippur. And the Gemara says, this goes like the Tana, who holds that the Avodim, those 10 days don't work. Meaning that for 10 days they eat and drink, and they go free on Yom Kippur. So in a sense, they stopped working already from Rosh Hashanah. So in that sense, the Yovel begins then. But according to the other Tanoim, they still work the first 10 days. They really only go free on Yom Kippur. But even according to the Tana of the Mishnah, really in a sense, it only begins on Yom Kippur. So what is the idea of a year that begins on Yom Kippur? Why does Shemitah begin on Rosh Hashanah, and why does Yovel begin on Yom Kippur? When you think about it for a second, you realize an amazing thing. Rosh Hashanah, of course, is the day of creation. Hayom Haras Olam. Today is the day of the conception of the world. Hayom Yamad Mishpat Kol Yitzurei Olam. Really, Rosh Hashanah is the day that puts the entire Bria at risk. It's the Yom HaDin. And the conclusion of the din could very well be that it's curtains. It's over. Finished. Because what is the day which guarantees the world has a kiyum? Is Yom Kippur. Right? Yom Kippur is the day of forgiveness. Yom Kippur is the day where our tshuva is niskabel. Right? It's only Yom Kippur which is the guarantee that the ratzain that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had in the original Bria will be realized no matter what. That we can't destroy the world through our maisim because of the afsharus, because of the possibility of our tshuva being niskabel on Yom Kippur. And that's Yovel. In other words, the lesson of Shemitah is that it's God's world. He created the world, it's His world, we have to follow His rules, we have to be grateful to Him. So therefore, of course, when does Shemitah begin? Shemitah begins on Rosh Hashanah, which is the day of creation. What is Yovel? Yovel is the understanding that Atzas Hashem Yisokum, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Eitzah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's plan will be realized. When does that begin? That begins in Yom Kippur. That's what Yom Kippur is. Yom Kippur is the day which is the safety valve, if you will, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Ratzon, and having created the world, will inevitably be realized, because we cannot be makalkel the world to the extent that it will be destroyed, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu built in the possibility of tshuva and forgiveness. And by the way, I'll just mention one other thing that we've said over many times in the past. The Maharal, in many places, but one of the noteworthy places is in the Chidushei Agodas, in Masechah Shabbos, where it talks about the symbolism of the number 7 and 8. And we can put it this way, the number 6, 7, and 8. But 6 is symbolic of the physical world, because from a single point in three-dimensional space, you can go in 6 directions. You go up, down, forward, backward, right, and left. So a cube has 6 faces for that reason. 7 is the spiritual core in the middle, which holds everything together. 8 is the spiritual dimension which transcends the physical world. That's why things that are miraculous relate to the number 8. Chanukah is 8, Bris Milah is 8, because Bris Milah is a perfection of the guf, which is beyond nature. The Moral speaks of this. Chanukah is 8. Like Oz Yoshir Moshe, Oz, Chazal says, Remes Tchias Amesim, Oz is the Aleph over 7. I mean, there are many, many remote with this idea of 8. The ultimate 8, of course, is 50. We all know that, right? The ultimate 8 is 50. Why is the ultimate 8 50? 50 is the number that follows 7 times 7. Now, the ultimate 7 is 7 times 7, right? And the ultimate 8, therefore, is 50. It's the number beyond. Now, that means that the very definition of the day of Matan Torah, the day of Yovel, is an understanding which transcends the understanding of 7. And I believe in our context, this is the idea that not just that it's God's world, but there's a purpose, there's a function, there's a tachlis. That is the lesson of Parshas BeHar. Right? Number 1, that it's God's world, and number 2, that God's purposes in the world will be realized no matter what. When we think about this for a moment, we realize that there's a very, very deep connection between the Parsha of the Makalel and Parshas BeHar B'Chukosai. First on the simplest level, and then on the much deeper level. What does BeHar talk about? BeHar talks about the Yovel. What is the Yovel? Everybody finding his place. Right? A person sold his land, he became disconnected from his achuzah. Right? Comes Yovel, v'shavtin ishal achuzasa. Every person returns to his place, he finds his place in the divine scheme. What was the grievance of the Makalel? What was the grievance of the Makalel? The grievance of the Makalel was he had no place in the divine scheme. What did Rashi bring? What was the Makalel complaining about? The Makalel was a Jew. His mother was Jewish. He didn't belong to a Shevet. So where is he going to camp? He figured he'll camp with his mother's Shevet, which was Shevet Dan. If he goes to pitch his tent in Shevet Dan, someone comes to him, what are you doing here? You can't pitch your tent here. You don't belong to Shevet Dan. So they went to the Bezdino Shal Moshe, and Moshe ben Paskin, he had no right to pitch his tent in Shevet Dan. You have no place. Right? See, he was Makalel. He was Makalel. So we cursed Ribono Shel Olam. So it's an amazing thing. That what is the Parsha of the Makalel? The Parsha of the Makalel, what incited the Makalel was this sense of not having a place. He Demis didn't have a place. He didn't belong to a Shevet, so he had no place. What does Parshas BeHar talk about? Finding your place. There are people that voluntarily lose their place. They come back to it in Yovel. So there's some connection over here, something which is very, 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 not just a coincidence, that this is the issue over here. I think the issue is really like this. And this is really why the Parsha of the Makalel is really the conclusion, it's the culmination of Sefer Vayikra. It can happen. I'm not saying in present company, but it can happen in the life of a Jew that when he reflects on the laws, the rules imposed upon him, there can be resentment and even anger. The Ummah Ha'olam have Sheva mitzvahs. I have Taryag mitzvahs. Why do I have to have Taryag mitzvahs? And he can get along with Sheva mitzvahs. Why does a woman have it easier than a man? Or why does a man have it easier than a woman, depending on how you look at it? The chilukim, which the Torah makes, and especially the chilukim, which the imperative of Kadeshim Tiyu is mechayev, have the power to create anger and resentment. The Ishbitzer writes an amazing thing. The Ishbitzer writes that the key, if a person wants to deal with anger, wants to cope with anger, how do you cope with anger? You have to reflect on the idea, Kili Haaretz, that the world is God's world. That's why. So he gives a mashal. Let's say you go into your house, and things aren't as you would like it. You know, you went away, you expected the kids to wash the dishes and to straighten up and do whatever they're meant to do, and you come home and of course, nothing was done. So you're upset, you're angry. But why isn't it exactly as I wanted? Okay, you go into someone else's house, and it's not exactly as you expected, you don't get angry. This is why. It's not my house. It's not reasonable for me to have expectations that it should be the way I want it here. But this is my house. It should be the way I want it. But if you understand that this world is God's world, it's not my world, it's God's world. So therefore, I can't have any expectations. Whatever I have is icing on the cake. It's not reasonable for me to have expectations that have to conform to the way I think. Then you'll never have anger. The Makalel, the problem of the Makalel is that the Makalel thought he was living in his own world. And his own world is expectations. You have a place, I should have a place. Well, only you have a place? No, you have a place, I don't have a place. Why shouldn't I have a place? So they're expectations. Well, what kind of crazy world is this? There are all sorts of rules that if you're Jewish, that's determined by the mother. What Sheva you belong to determined by the father. So now I'm caught in between because I have a Jewish mother and a mitzvah father. So therefore I'm a Jew, but I have no place. That's contrary to what I would expect. So he was angry. That anger led him to a terrible aveira. He was a makabel. But if he would understand that it's God's world, he wouldn't have gotten angry. You understand? He has no right to expect anything. Where do you see this? You see this, there's another parsha in the Torah about a person who didn't like his chaylik. Kairach. Like Kairach had a complaint that he was only a Levi, he wanted to be a Kairach. So Moshe Rabbeinu says, how not to become, it's a small thing. Well, you should be happy, you're a Levi. Well, you want to be a Kairach? So Moshe told Kairach, Biker, tomorrow morning, Biker, Hashem will decide who the Kayin should be. So Rashi brings there, Midrasha, I'll bring you a shot from the Medrash, what does Biker mean? That Moshe told him like this, there are gevulais, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made boundaries in the world. There are boundaries between night and day. Can you change that? Can you turn night into day and day into night? No. So this you also can't change. There are boundaries. Vayibodel Aaron lahakdisho kaidish kadoshim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu designated Aaron to be holy of holies. That's a boundary you can't change. And the sooner you understand that, is the sooner you'll be able to cope with this resentment. That we are in God's world. Now the truth is, if you go back to the Makalel, this really opens up an amazing insight, I think, into the Midrash that Rashi brings. Because one of them really is inexplicable when you think about it. But Lefi Devarim, we have a very good approach. It says regarding the Makalel, it says Vayetze, that the Makalel went out. So what do you mean he went out? Where did he go out of? So Rashi brings three pshatim. One pshat is that me'olamo yatsa. He lost his olam haba. Okay, that makes perfect sense. You curse God, you lose your olam haba. Then he brings another pshat, the second pshat, that he left from the parsha shalamala. He left from the previous parsha. The previous parsha is lechem apanim. And the lechem apanim, it says they baked bread and put it on the shulchan once a week. So the Makal said, well, doesn't make any sense. So a king, you serve him cold bread? Every day you bake fresh bread for a king. What kind of a king is that? That you only bake bread for him once a week. So that's another pshat. Third pshat, mi bezdino shel Moshe yatsa. He left the bezdin of Moshe, meaning he lost his case, and they passed and he had no right to pitch his tent, therefore he got angry and he was makalo. These are the three pshatim. The middle pshat is at first glance inexplicable. Oh, he has a good kasha. Then why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu ask, we bake bread for him once a week, we should bake bread every day. A king should have fresh bread every day. Okay, a good kasha. It's a good kasha. That was a good kasha. So that's why you curse God? Wait, what does that mean? The last one I understand. He was frustrated. He wanted a place to pitch his tent. Moshe ran a path, he doesn't have a place. So we curse God. Okay, that I understand. Even that's hard to understand. But But he has a kasha. Why does the Baruch Hu say to bake lechem upon him once a week, to bake fresh bread every day? So you curse. Why would you curse the Baruch Hu for that? It all has to do with the royal wedding. Very important occasion that was passed. And if you read the newspapers, they told us that the royal wedding saved the monarchy. Because Baruch Hashem, since it was a royal wedding, so now we know what we need the monarchy for. What does that mean? Let's understand that. The monarchs of Britain have no power. They don't make any decisions, but they perform a very important function. What's the function? There's a natural human need. We want celebration, we want ritual, we want pageantry, and the royals give us the opportunity for that. And there's been a little bit of a dry spell. We haven't had so many ceremonies. Next year is the Diamond Jubilee. We're looking forward to that. But there hasn't been, for the last few years, anything noteworthy. So the royal wedding saved the monarchy, because now we see what the value of the monarchy is. The monarchy gives us the opportunity to celebrate and have rituals and have pageants. Next year, again, Diamond Jubilee, but this year we had the royal wedding. And that's all we expect of the royals. We don't expect them to make decisions. We don't expect them to lay down policies. We only expect them to be there, to be the objects of our adoration, and be able to enjoy the pomp, etc. That's what the Makal said. The Makal said that we don't expect of God that God should lay down policies. We don't expect he should lay down rules. He is there that we should be able to adore him. He's there we should be able to serve him, to worship him. We should have the pageantry, the ceremony, and so on and so forth. He says, what kind of ceremony is this? You bake bread once a week, you stale bread all week? That's not what we need God for, right? We need God for ritual and for ceremony and for pageantry, and every day there should be fresh bread put on the table. God is not living up to our expectations. But what's the mistake of the Makal? The mistake of the Makal is that's not what the Rebbeinu Shalom is all about. The Rebbeinu Shalom isn't there, right, for us to satisfy this deep-rooted need for ceremony. He's there because this is his world, and he lays down the rules. And among those rules are that whether you're Jewish is determined by your mother, what Sheva you belong to is determined by your father, and as a result there will be people that slip between the cracks who are Jewish but don't belong to a Sheva and never don't have a place. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. Why does he want that? It's a good question. But that's what he wants. That's his plan. What did the Makal want? The Makal wanted a God who doesn't make policies. Right? He's a God that we serve, that we can deify. This satisfies our need for pomp and circumstance. On the other hand, we don't want a God who makes rules and asserts his authority over the world. And therefore, God is a failure on two counts. His ceremony is not ceremonial enough, and his policies we don't work. So that's why he cursed the Rebbeinu Shalom. There's no steer between the two pshatim in Rashi. Rashi is saying that from the Makal's perspective, the Rebbeinu Shalom is a failure on both counts. But we have to understand that the emes is that this is God's world. And therefore, when the Rebbeinu Shalom sets boundaries, just like he set down the boundaries of morning and evening, Boker, V'yodas Hashem Asher Lo, he sets down the boundaries, being Yisrael v'Ha'amim, being Kodesh l'Chayil, all the boundaries which are the essential element of Kedusha. We have to understand that's his prerogative, because this is his world. We can't be resentful. We have to be accepting and even grateful for that. And this is the conclusion, this is the culmination of Sefer Vayikra. This is the last lesson we need to learn before we turn away from Sefer Vayikra, right, which is this idea. Sefer Vayikra, if you have to sum up the theme of the whole Sefer in one word, it's Kedusha. It begins with the Kedusha of the Mikdash and the Karbanas and the Torah of the Mikdash. It precedes in Kadesh Tiyu, Kedusha in everyday life. It goes to Parshas Emor, where we have differentiation. We have the Kedusha of persons, Kaihanim as opposed to non-Kaihanim. The Kedusha of Zmanim, Shabbos, Yom Tovim as opposed to the Yemei HaChoil. These are gvulos that the Kadosh Baruch Hu establishes. And we have to understand, this is his prerogative, this is God's right, this is his world. And the failure to recognize that has awful consequences. That's the story of the Makalo. What Parsha teaches us the emes is BeHar Chukaisai. It's the Parsha Shemitah and Yovel. There's no other Parsha in the Torah which more drives home the point that we're living in God's world. And that's why there's no chronological order here, but there's a thematic order. The conclusion to the Parsha of the Makalel is Parsha BeHar Chukosai. And the amazing irony is this, that the grievance of the Makalel was that he did not have a place. But the Torah is telling us an important thing, that if you recognize that it is God's world, then you will find your place. And therefore, after you go through Shemitah, 7 Shemitas, and you understand that, yes, this is God's world, then you come to the ultimate Shemini, which is Yovel, which is V'shavti Mishal Achuzas V'shal Mishpachta Teshuvu. You find your place. Not everyone will find its place in the conventional way. Some people will find their place in Mishpacha, in Nachla, those people that belong to a Shevet. Other people will find their place in unconventional ways. But even that Makaleh, if he would have learned his lesson properly, if he would have understood that this is God's world, he would have found a place. It would have been an unconventional place. It would have been an unconventional place. Sometimes a person's life circumstances are such that he doesn't know why he is in this situation. I'll tell you a maisa, a small vignette which I think illustrates this. Reb Simcha Wasserman, Zechat Tzaddik Livracha, was the son of B'nan Shal Kadoshim, great Reb Chama Wasserman, was in Europe, and the Hatzah, the idea came to go to America. Ultimately, he did go to America. He was a Miyasid, Meister Satira, in Detroit, in California, later in France, a great builder of Torah. At that time, and of course, throughout his life, he had no children. And the question was, should he go to America? He went to speak to his father about this question. By coincidence, of course there's no coincidence, the person who went into his father immediately before also went in with the question of going to America. And the person went in and he said he has a suggestion to go to America and start something. So Rabbi Khan said, you have children? Yes, he has children. So Rabbi Khan said, how would you consider going to America? You know, America then is not like America now. So he says, you can't consider going to America. And then his son Rabbi Simcha went in, and Rabbi Simcha asked for going to America, and Rabbi Khan says, you can go to America. So Rabbi Simcha wasn't privy to the earlier conversation. He just knew that the previous person was told not to go to America, and he was told to go to America. So he asked his father, what's the difference? So he told him, he says, he has children, you don't have children. And Rabbi Khan said, and perhaps that's why you don't have children. Perhaps the reason the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't give you children is that you should be able to go to America and build Torah. Because every person thinks that I'm going to find my place in the conventional way. I'll get married, I'll have children, I'll raise them. And then it doesn't work out and the people don't have children. And they're very dejected, they're very sad. And sometimes they realize that their mission in life necessitates their being in this situation, because to do what they have to do, they have to have that freedom to be able to go anywhere. And that would be impossible with children. The pshat is, everyone has a place in a HaKadosh Baruch Hu scheme. It's just you have to know that this is God's world. Some people have it in a conventional way, some people have it in an unconventional way. Says the Makal would have had a place in the scheme, just not in the conventional way. But he looks at everyone else. Everyone else has a nachla, everyone else has an inheritance, everyone has a chelik, there's a place to pitch his tent. I don't have a chelik to pitch my tent. So what's my portion? Of course there's a place. Don't say there's a person that doesn't have a place. Right? Shaw, right? Everything is a place in God's scheme. It's just that in certain instances it's conventional, in certain instances it's not conventional. The Makal would have had a place, but he didn't learn his lesson. He thought that everyone is meant to have the same type of place, and therefore the rules are messed up. And obviously batched. He made rules that are inconsistent and result in these anomalies, and therefore he was Makal. But that's what we have to understand. We have to learn that lesson. The lesson we have to learn is the lesson of BeHar B'Chukosai. We have to avoid the fate of the Makabel. These are the conclusions. These are the culminations of Sefer Vayikra. In life, so often we look at the great deeds that other people are doing, and we're filled with jealousy. I wish I could do that. There's a Gemara Mesechus Tainus. The Gemara Mesechus Tainus says like this: that there was a person named Abu Umna. Abu Umna was a bloodletter, and Abu Umna received a greeting from the Masifta Durakia every day. Every day he got greetings from the Masifta Durakia, the heavenly Yeshiva. Abaya, the great Abaya, only got a greeting once a week, Erev Shabbos, from the Masifta Durakia. Rava only got it once a year, Erev Yom Kippur, from the Masifta Durakia. So the Gemara says that Abaya was very, very upset. Abaya was upset. He says, Abu Umna, the doctor, gets it every day, I only get once a week. So they told him, who they were, they told him, At lo motzis avdis ka Abu Umna. You can't do what he does. You can't do what he does. What does he do? So he wants those nice. First of all, Abu Umna, everyone comes to let blood. He has separate waiting rooms for men and women. That's the first thing. Right, separate waiting rooms, men and women. Secondly, he has a special garment which has the needle already sewn into the garment. So normally a woman would come to have her blood let, she'd have to expose her arm, and that's needles. So instead he has a special garment, the needle already installed, so he tells the woman to put on the garment, and therefore he can let the blood, her arm is still covered. Thirdly, says he doesn't charge money. There's a pushka there. If you can afford, you put money in. If you can't afford, you take money out. And the Gemara tells all sorts of things. It says you can't do that. So the question, you can't do that, right? Abaya could quit being a Rosh Yeshiva, go to medical school, become a doctor, and he could do that. Right? Why can't he do that? So Nachman of Breslov says, because every person is put into this world for a purpose. And you're given kishraynos, you're given talents, and you're given opportunities, and from that you're meant to understand what your place in the world is. Right? Abu Umna realized his talents. He was qualified to be a bloodletter, and this is what he did, and he arranged his practice in such a way that it would be an opportunity to promote snivas, to promote staka, and that's what he did. That's not Abaya's job. Abaya is a different tachlis. You were given the kishraynos to be a Rosh Yeshiva, to be a Marbitz Torah, that's what you were given. Now the reward of being an Abu Umna is different than the reward of being an Abaya. Abu Umna's reward is to be the recipient of regards from the Sifta Durakia every day. Abaya's reward may be an Olam Haba, who knows. Says, but you can't do Abu Umna. If you would try to do his job and just be imitating him, that wouldn't be you. So you wouldn't be Abaya and you wouldn't be Abu Umna either. So Yaakov Meir Shechter, one of the Svarim, brings a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Very beautiful Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara says that there's a saying, people used to say, that a camel once went to ask for horns. Camels don't have horns. Went to ask for horns, so the ears that it had were cut off. Because the Gemara says, the Gemara says, if you look for something which isn't yours, so know what you want, you don't get. And what you have is taken away from you. So the camel wants horns. Where did he get the idea of horns? He looked at a bull. The bull has horns. He wants horns. So he doesn't get his horns, and his ears are cut off. So he says, what does it mean? He says, he says like this, that horns is a symbol of authority, the symbol of power. Rama Karni Bashem, right? the Karnei Re'im Karnov, and so on and so forth. Karno Torah B'Kavod. It's a symbol of authority. There are people whose place in life is to be authoritative. They're Balei Deya, they say, they teach, they inspire. This is their role. There are other Yidden whose role is to have ears, is to listen, to be makabel, to accept. Right? Let's say you have a Yid whose role is to be a makabel, and he decides, I don't want to be makabel, I don't want to be listening, I don't want to be a passive listener. I want to be a Deya Zoger myself. I also want to have an opinion. So he wants horns. So what happens? He doesn't get horns and he loses his ears. Right? A person has to understand, there has to be that much self-awareness to understand what my place is. Either there's resentment, because you always look at the other person and you prefer his place better. The answer is, it's not our world. It's the Rebbeinu Shalom's world. And the Rosh made me this way. These are my talents, these are my opportunities, these are my resources. This is what I'm meant to be. And this is what he's meant to be. And I shouldn't be jealous of him and he shouldn't be jealous of me. We're each made and put in a set of circumstances which is exactly suitable for me. This is where the Makalel went astray, and this is what the lesson of Shemitah and Yovel is meant to be, that this is the Rebbeinu Shalom's world. And the Atzar Hashem Yisakum, that Yovel teaches us something even more than Shemitah, that the Rebbeinu Shalom's plan will be realized no matter what. There's no way to escape it. There's no way to undermine it. There's no way to change it. You can either reject it like the Makalo and suffer the consequences, or you can live with it happily and achieve your purpose. And that's a very, very important message, especially in the conclusion of a statement like Sefer Vayikra. Sefer Vayikra, which makes so many demands of us, and therefore creates so much opportunity for bitterness and resentment. Why can't it be different? Why can't it be this way? Why can't it be like that? This is why we have to have these lessons just where they